welcome to another episode of It's 502 Somewhere, a show where we talk to the people that make up the culture and identity of the city of Louisville. I'm your host, Andrew Crum, and I'm very excited to have this guest on. Whenever I thought of like the idea of this show, talking to the people that make up the culture of the city of Louisville, Card Chronicle and Mike Rutherford always are what come to mind. So I really appreciate you coming on. And Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. I really appreciate you having me. I'm excited to be here.
So at first, just to start off, just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're currently up to these days in the worlds of sports media.
Name's Mike Rutherford. I've been doing cardchronicle.com, which covers Louisville sports now for getting close to 20 years. It's been, I guess, 19 years, which is 175 years in internet years. So it's been a long time. I host the Mike Rutherford Show, 2:30 to 5:30 now on 1450 and 96.1. The Big X. I've been doing that for coming up on 4 years. This is after stints with, it was on 790. I was on 93.9. If there's a radio station in Louisville, at some point in time, you've heard me on that station. I do a podcast, CC podcast. I also cover college basketball full-time for SB Nation. I did that before the pandemic. And then they slashed a lot of jobs after the pandemic. And just in the last few months, I've gone back over there full time. So if people pay me to write or say anything, I will do it for the most part, as long as it pertains to sports. So that's where I am currently right now. May change tomorrow. Who knows?
Yeah. And, when you were younger, you talk about your work with SB Nation and when you started up Card Chronicle. When you were younger, was there ever an inkling that you wanted to be a sports writer? I know your dad worked in sports journalism, and or just like, did you have any inkling just as a writer, as a creative when you were growing up?
Yeah, for sure. I think like what Tony Kornheiser says, that every sports media person's a frustrated athlete. I think that's, yeah, I mean, growing up, I was very much about sports. I saw myself doing something in sports. I think for a long time I wanted to play sports professionally, and then I realized, after I didn't grow past the age of 12, it was going to be pretty tough to make that happen. So I was always a good writer. I come from a family of writers. You mentioned my dad. He actually didn't cover sports, but he was a Metro columnist for the Courier Journal for a long time. Also wrote for the Louisville Times and the Lexington Herald Leader. And then my grandfather, his name was John Ed Pierce. He wrote for the Courier Journal for a long time, won a Pulitzer Prize. He was a big deal back in the day. Also wrote a bunch of books and stuff like that. So it was one of those things where growing up, I kind of realized pretty early on what I wasn't good at and what I was better at. I was not a math guy. That wasn't going to be my future, but I was okay with words. And then as time went on, I think that the emerging like blogosphere, what was called back in the day, was something that really piqued my interest. You could find new stories written in new voices at all hours of the day. And that was something that I really kind of gravitated towards in college. And the first blog that I started was actually like a political website. I was going to school in Ohio during the 2004 election, got very into it. And I realized pretty quickly that maybe that wasn't going to be something that I wanted to do long term. And so when I got home, I transferred back to Bellarmine for my last 2 years of college. I was living back with my parents, and it felt like I was bored. It felt like the perfect time to kind of fuse two of my great loves. I did really like writing, but I loved Louisville sports. And at that time, there really wasn't a dedicated like blog. I know it's kind of like people don't use the word blog anymore, so I feel weird even saying it, but there wasn't a dedicated blog to Louisville sports. So I went on Blogger. I launched, the first website was thecardreport.blogspot.com. And I just started posting a bunch of stuff every single day. And it kind of took off from there.
And one thing I find interesting, just different generations, as a diehard Louisville fan, when you were growing up, you spent a lot of your younger days rooting for Louisville, kind of in the 90s when Louisville basketball was good. You had DeJuan Wheat and all those guys, but it didn't really take full effect of like what Louisville basketball can be until, the early 2000s with the first Rick Pitino teams, and, went to the Final Four in 2005. It was a bit of a reverse for me in my upbringing because, I was thrown right into, okay, I'm 7 years old, Final Four, here you go.
Yeah.
And it's kind of been a reverse to college and post-college, where we've had the opposite of that. I'm pretty sure the second month I was in college when I was at UK was when all the stuff went down. Not the best time and place to be. Do you think that type of upbringing and growing up with a program and then kind of growing with it and how the program evolved at that point shaped how you view and talk about U of L athletics now?
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think everybody, regardless of your generation, what you sort of go through or what you experience in those formative years shapes the rest of your existence as a fan. And so I was born in 1984, so I was one when we won the national title in '86. I've got no recollection of that whatsoever. But I had, my dad was a diehard Louisville fan, and then I had two older half brothers who were 15 and 12 years older than me, respectively. So I grew up kind of hearing about the great days of the '80s and being sort of pissed off that I didn't get to experience that. I mean, I remember vividly, there used to be these, I don't know if anybody listening remembers this, there used to be these shows on ESPN that they would play during the day that were recaps of old Final Fours. Every episode was a half hour. They talked about the four teams that were there, and they had highlights, they had interviews, and it was like, that's kind of how I learned a lot about college basketball that happened before I was born. And I'll never forget, I was like homesick from school one day when I was probably like 6, 7 years old, watching all the ones from the '80s, and I was like, oh my god, like Louisville won a national title. I was like, oh my god, Louisville's in another Final Four. Louisville's in and I went down and I told my dad, I was like, did you know about this? Like Louisville used to be really really good. And he's like, yeah. It looked like I was crazy. I was like, well, nobody told me that, like, we didn't peak out at like Sweet 16s or Elite Eights. But I remember, I think every Louisville fan has that first great run that they really remember. For you, Final Four. For me, we had two runs in '96 and '97 where we were a 6 seed. We knocked off Villanova and Kerry Kittles in the second round in 1996. And then a year later, we went around further. We knocked off Texas in the Sweet 16 after once again pulling a 6-3 upset over New Mexico in the second round, and then lost to North Carolina. And for somebody who hadn't experienced that, who'd experienced some pretty lean years, and I was 11 and 12 in those years, like the perfect age to really be like, to latch on to it. It hooked me. But you got to remember, at the time when Louisville, like you said, was kind of going through some lean years, Kentucky was the crown prince of college basketball. So everybody who grows up around here knows you've got those rivalries with the kids in your class, and you're talking smack every single day. And we really didn't have much ammo. So when my friends who were Kentucky fans, when they experienced that national title in 2012, it was really cool. But like, they had grown up expecting to be in Final Fours and expecting to win national titles, and it was a letdown when you didn't get past the Elite Eight. And for my Louisville friends and I, it did feel like a little bit more of like an earned moment. Like, I remember vividly, like being in Atlanta when the team ran out onto the floor and having this sort of, they talk about your life flashing in front of your life when you die, or in front of your eyes. Like, when they ran on the floor, I had all these visions of like watching games with my dad on WDRB on the couch, like watching us like play Southern Miss and stuff back in the day, then like going to games with my friends when I got a little bit older. And it just felt like all of that, staying true, staying loyal, caring so much about this for reasons that I think are still unclear to me. It was all like building up to that moment. And it was like, here you go. Like, you've earned the right to take this in. Let's go win a national title. And I don't think if you went through like those years, it'll still mean a ton to me. Like, I experienced the 2013 national title. The next time we win it, I'm going to be just as, euphoric, just as through the roof. But it was different for us, who kind of wondered if we would ever, like, imagining us winning a national title when I was growing up just kind of blew your mind. It was something that you couldn't really comprehend. And then to actually experience it at 28 or however old I was very, very cool.
Yeah. And that feels like the perfect time, honestly,
Yeah.
to celebrate like a championship. And I'll skip over this last question. Well, actually, I'll ask it. I know you went to Dayton for a little bit. As someone who was a Cards fan who was at UK, what was that experience like? Probably different than mine, where I live with UK fans. That one of my roommates put like on a poster on the wall when UK football beat U of L against Lamar, which was insane. But did you have any? What was that experience like for you at Dayton?
It was, I mean, it was definitely different. I mean, growing up, like, I didn't know how I was going to react when I went to college. Like, all I knew was I was a diehard Louisville fan. And so growing up, I was kind of like, if I go to a different school, am I going to lose a little bit of that passion? Am I going to become a fan of that team or whatever? And, Louisville, admittedly, when I was growing up, like not many people that I knew stuck around to go to U of L. Like a lot of people wanted to get out and have that college experience. And if you were going to go to Louisville, it was either because you were an athlete or because you were like, you wanted to stay at home and commute to school and save some money early on in college. And thankfully it's changed a lot in the, 20 years since then. I'm very old now at this point, but going to Dayton, I quickly kind of became known as like the Louisville guy, me and my friends. And we made a lot of friends with people from, there's a lot of people who went to Chicago, were from Chicago, who went to Dayton then. And they couldn't comprehend that we would be more Louisville fans than like Dayton fans. And I always kind of had to explain it. Like we don't have pro sports teams here. Louisville is just like the Bears and the Cubs and the Bulls to you guys. And I was kind of like, are you going to start rooting for the Bengals now that you like live pretty close to Cincinnati? And they're like, well, no, that's ridiculous. I'm like, that's exactly the way that I feel. Like Louisville is just my team. And if anything, I think a lot of people who move away have this experience. Like moving away from home, like almost strengthened my fandom. Like I became more proud of being a Louisville fan. And it also it coexisted with some really good years for the spotlight programs in football and men's basketball. We went to the Final Four in '05 when I was a sophomore at Dayton. The football teams were really good both of those years. But I'll never forget, like by my sophomore year in the classes that I had, I kind of like everybody knew that I was like this big Louisville fan. And so we have the spotlight game against Miami in football that Thursday when we're undefeated. They're like still kind of at the peak of the U era, the second U era. I think they were number 2, number 3 in the country. And it's this huge Thursday night game where we get up 24-7. We lead most of the way. And then, of course, we kind of have some stuff happen late. Devin Hester happens. Stephon LaForest gets a concussion. Kerry Rhodes drops an interception. And we lose in heartbreaking fashion. I showed up to class the next Friday morning, and like everybody treated me like they knew that my mom had just died the night before. Like they walked in, like everybody's just kind of like, dude, like, how are you, man? I'm like, not great. I'm here. What do you want me to say? So it was definitely a different experience being a Louisville fan, not going to Louisville and going out of state. But I almost like, I liked it. I do felt like I became like a stronger fan, and any doubt that I had that maybe I would lose that passion once I got a little bit older and became like not a kid anymore rooting for Louisville, I think that pretty much rid me of that fear.
Absolutely. I feel the same way with going to another school. It's a little different UK, but as you left college, and I know you went to law school for a little bit, as you were doing Card Chronicle, starting to go on the radio, do you have like a certain moment for you when you kind of realize not only can I do this just for fun and make a little bit of money, but this can actually be a career and like something bigger than you had thought of before?
The early years were weird because it took off in a way that I didn't expect, as far as like people reading it and people saying really supportive stuff. But this is '07, '08, so it's still very new in like the sports internet world, and you've got the housing crisis happening at the same time. It was a terrible time to be getting out of college. So I wasn't sure if I was ever going to be able to like monetize it, because nobody was giving you money to do any of this sort of stuff, regardless of how many page views you had or how many clicks you had. It was like, unless you were writing vampire romance in 2008, like nobody was paying you to write words anymore. So it was kind of like, I felt like it was a little bit like The Social Network, where it's like, we don't know what this is. Like, we know it's cool. Like, what do we do with this? And it was almost really frustrating to be in a position where, like, this is what I want to do, some form of this, and it's getting really popular, and a lot of people are giving me positive feedback, but I can't live off of this. And so it was like a year after college when I kind of had to sort of figure out, like, what do we want to make a plan for the future? And so I started working at a law firm. My brothers are both lawyers. My dad had worked with attorneys, and it was kind of one of those deals where I was like, I'm going to do this, but in the back of my mind, I want to make sure that I keep the website going. I want to make sure that I keep that open, because if this becomes something that they are paying people to do 3, 4, 5 years down the line, I obviously would choose to do this. So I worked at a law firm for a couple of years, got into law school, went there for a year. And when I finished my first year, like, I liked law school. It was fine. But I also kind of I was like, I don't know if I could be one of those people who's a happy lawyer 10 years from now, especially with the website doing really well and not being able to make a ton of money off of it. And at that time, I got offered a job. I don't know if I've ever said this. I got offered a job to do college basketball with Yahoo because I'd done a lot of general college basketball stuff at that time, and I kind of went to the guy who was like sort of the in charge of the college sites at that time and said like, hey, just so you know, like I got this job offer. I want to keep doing Card Chronicle, but it'd be fiscally irresponsible to turn this down. And he sort of went to the powers that be at SB Nation. They just started launching like a national site where they were covering sports from a not fan perspective, just national perspective. And he was like, we don't have a college basketball guy. We'd love for you to be our college basketball guy. So they offered me like $100 more than the Yahoo contract. And I was fine with that because I got to keep doing Card Chronicle. But at that time, it was like, all right, this is the moment to sort of go for it. Like I was, I think 25, and it was, I didn't think I could really go for it and do law school at the same time because you were going to have to start doing summer internships. You're going to have to start thinking about what you wanted to do. So I made kind of took the leap of faith, dropped out of law school, went after this full time. It went really well for the first year. And they actually they offered me way more to keep doing it the next year. And from that point forward, it was like, I can kind of make a living off this. But the first time that I remember it kind of being like this is getting around a little bit was I wrote this thing of comparing Louisville football to Saved by the Bell. I mean, I
Oh
think
yeah.
it was like 3 a.m. I was living with my parents at this time. I have no idea what was going on in my life at that point. But like three different people came up to me at the St. Joe's picnic and they were like, oh, like they're like, you wrote the Saved by the Bell Louisville thing. Like I sent that to like 5 of my friends. And the second that I start feeling cool about myself, I'm going to the bathroom by myself, like with a beer in my hand. This guy goes, hey, Card Chronicle. And I was like, oh, here we go again. And he goes, bleep you, bro, from like a crawl in front of everybody. And all these people are like, oh, I take 2 more steps. I bump into somebody, spill my beer all over myself. So that was a humbling but cool moment at the same time. But it was kind of the first like, oh, this is getting around a little bit.
Yeah, and I feel like, with that brand of writing that you had, and then you made that transition eventually into radio, which, where that can be a different vibe with Card Chronicle, where you're writing, when you were writing like no one really was at the time, versus this new environment where now you have hundreds, thousands of people listening. How are you able to adapt to that new environment on the radio?
It was, I mean, so I did it off and on from a pretty early point. Like I was in college, and this is, I mean, I think some people listening probably know this. The first time I ever did radio on like a semi-regular basis was with Matt Jones of Kentucky
Yeah,
Sports
yeah, yeah.
Radio. So we kind of were the first 2 people to launch websites that were like blogs that had a decent following. So he had me on his early podcast when I was like 20 years old. And then a couple years later, he reached out to me and was like, hey, you remember me? Like we did a podcast together. I was like, yeah. And so he had just started doing like afternoon radio when he was still an attorney with Dugan Ryan, who now is my boss at the Big X. It was the Zone back then downtown. So I would go down there after class on like Thursdays, and we would do like a 3-hour show together in the afternoon. And Rob Goodell was a guy that was doing it at that time. So I did it off and on for a couple of years. And then Mark Ennis and I did a show for like 1 hour a week, one weeknight called the 2-Man Game on 680. So it was one of those, like I started getting paid a little bit off of that, but it was a lot of radio spots. When it became a full-time thing, that's when you sort of have to try to figure out like, how do I translate my fan voice from the website to radio? Because it's different. The blog can be like 6 one-line jokes and that's an entire post. You got to be able to fill things out a little bit more when you're doing a 3 hours of radio. So it was like, I think I was a little bit naive at first. Like I just sort of assumed like the website's doing great. All these people love the website. All these people are going to listen to me on the radio. Like they'll listen to whatever I do. And at first it was like, oh, there's not as many people like tuning in and getting really into this at first. So it took some time I think to kind of find my voice. And John Ramsey helped out with that. He was a radio pro who kind of, worked me through the ins and the outs, and playing off of him, we ended up creating a pretty fun dynamic together. But yeah, it was not like I was kind of trained to do writing growing up. I was a journalism major. So I kind of had the natural writing background. So that came pretty easily. And then just kind of working, what I'd like to say is like kind of the natural humor that I had into the writing came pretty easily. Radio was something that I had not ever gone to school for, never practiced for. And it took a little bit more time, I think, to get down. But it's like anything else. I think the more you do it, the better you get at it. So it was, thankfully I've been doing it for a while now. I'm still not sure if I'm any good at it, but we've been doing it for a long time now.
Now, and one thing I find interesting, kind of like what you were saying with John Ramsey, how you were kind of learning a lot of what he was doing. He was a radio pro. You were, the younger guy with him at the time. Now you have your own show with kind of an up and coming guy like Roman. What do you think is the difference between those two dynamics for you in radio now that like you're kind of the experienced person working alongside someone who's, gaining experience in the media world?
Oh, it's weird as hell. I mean, I'll just say it. Like working in sports and doing so much with social media and being able to like, in a lot of ways, like it's allowed me to not like, at least when I'm like in work mode, like not really feel the years passing, like not really feel like I'm growing up that much. Obviously, outside stuff, you know, like, you got a money guy now. You gotta do your taxes. You have a tax person. You go to the doctor now. That they treat you differently when you get older. I got married. I had kids. But when it came to like radio, I always felt like I sort of had like the younger personality. I was an old soul growing up, so it was a weird spot for me to be in as like sort of like the younger guy and like fresh with the slang and like making the jokes that the older guys didn't get. And then it was almost like snap of a finger, I'm the guy who's pushing 40. And then like within the last year, I've got a producer who's 24, 25 years old. And he's talking about stuff that I've got no idea. Like I've completely lost. I'm like, when did this happen? When I just completely became out of touch with what's going on with the 20 somethings. But it's definitely different. I do, I answer as many questions for Roman as I can. But it's weird because John came up with like sort of a traditional background. He did a million different things growing up. He didn't do sports on the radio, so that was a little bit new for him. But he had done like he knew about how to do great ad reads, how to work sponsors into the conversations fluently without it feeling clunky, and he was able to help me with a lot of that stuff. And for me, it's sort of like I'd love to give. When people come to me for advice, like I'd love to be able to give like this, but it's so different. Like this all kind of happened by accident. Like I just sort of, it spiraled from one thing to the next and I sort of just picked it up as I went. So the only thing that I always tell Roman is nowadays, like you've got to be, I mean, I'm a perfect example. You got to be multi-skilled. Like you can't just do one thing. I got into this thinking I was just going to write. And it got to a point where it's like, you can't make a living doing this just writing. I think Eric Crawford had a good story about this actually just a couple months ago. Like, it's got to be like writing. You got to do some TV stuff. You got to do some video stuff. You got to do podcasting. You've got to do, radio stuff. And if you can't do all of that, like you've got to find producing. You've got to be able to find it helps to know what's going on behind the scenes, knowing what switches to flip and all that good stuff. I mean, you guys, all the state of Louisville guys are so good with the production value. And, that's a huge thing nowadays. So that's always kind of what I've told him is just don't focus on doing one thing really, really well. Find one thing that you're the best at, hone that skill, but then also spend the rest of your time making sure that you're good at a number of other things, because that's kind of the only way. Like nobody just lets you do one thing anymore. So that's one thing that I wish I'd known more of when I was like 20, 25 years old. I would have focused more on kind of getting, I guess, a better grasp on like the technological side and maybe trying to do some of my own like podcast radio stuff.
One of the things you had mentioned earlier, kind of like when you were talking about growing up and when you kind of started getting big as Card Chronicle, was the story of the guy yelling at you in the bathroom with the Saved by the Bell story. And I feel like now you've become one of the largest faces, if not like the face of like Louisville sports media. And I feel like you're also like just a well-known person in the city of Louisville. And on the pod, you mentioned people coming up to you. Has that been a weird experience in being able to like manage as like a local public figure, especially now at 40 with a family in comparison to when you were first rising up?
I mean, a little. I mean, first of all, let me say, like, it's not like I can't go to the grocery store or anything like that. It's not like I can't leave my house without somebody coming up and say, like, there are many times where I leave the house and not one person says anything to me. But it is, I mean, I think when you're like when I was like 23 and I would go to bars, like people that I didn't know every now and then would come up and be like, dude, we got to buy you a shot. Like that was awesome. Like that blew my mind. I think the first time where it really became like, this is, I can't believe that this has gotten to this point, was when we went to the Final Four in Atlanta, and there was like there were a couple of like U of L like theme part, like the official U of L party to go to before the Final Four game and the national title game. And like I was with my friends who like they knew that it was like the website was popular, but like people kept coming up and just like bringing me drinks and kept wanting to talk. And that was the first time where I think they were sort of like, this is it's a bigger deal than we thought it was. And that was one of those experiences where I was like, if this never gets bigger or better than this, it's still been all worth it. I mean, like I think some people kind of back then would get into it just to sort of feel cool, just to try to get press passes and to be on the sidelines. Like I never really like I just really love Louisville sports. And it's always been something that I've cared about more than I probably should for reasons that, like I said earlier, I don't fully comprehend. Like it's just, I mean, everybody listening knows it. It's in your blood, whether you're born with it or you develop it later in life. Like once it gets in there, you just become, it's something that means a lot to you. And so to be able to take something that I always liked doing growing up, which was right. I mean, I was always, my mom will tell you this, like there are a million, she refuses to throw them away. I wrote like a million fake sports articles growing up. I would make like fake sports shows with a little camcorder that we had. It was always something that I liked doing and that I think eventually I got pretty good at. And I love the ability to take the stuff that like my friends and I would joke about, put it on the internet for everybody to read and see how many people had the same fan experience. Like nobody else was really doing that back then. And now kind of everybody does. The example that I give is, you remember Juan Palacios wore the
Yeah.
goggles when he got poked in the eye by Rajon Rondo. And for that year, it seemed like he played so much better when he was wearing the goggles than he was without them. And so I just like I wrote about it constantly. I was like, put the goggles on, like that was something that back then nobody else would write about because it was this quirky little funny storyline. Nowadays, like Courier Journal, whoever, Big J journalists, they're all going to write about the same stuff. But back then, it was just about putting that fan experience out there. And I think that's what really allowed me and the website to take off was there were so many people that just like felt the exact same way, saw the same stuff, remembered the same things. And it was a cool place for everybody to kind of share in that. And so that's like, it was just cool to me to get started, to be able to share that and see how it took off. It was never about like, oh, it's cool every now and then that you get recognized. But to answer your question, I know I'm dancing around here. Getting a little bit older now, I mean, it is like it's different with having kids. Like my wife, there are times where she's like, you can't say this or don't put this out there. But she kind of recognizes that we have to be at least a little bit open because that's why people listen to the radio show for you. They love anybody can say, hey, Louisville won 74-68 last night. It was cool. They want to hear your viewpoint. Like they're listening for your personality. And so they want to hear stuff about my kids. They want to hear stuff. I mean, we walk around now. Virginia gets, I think my daughter gets people coming up to talk to her more than they do to me. Like they come up to me. I'm like, here comes a U of L question. They're like, your daughter is just hilarious. And I'm like, there you go. So it's definitely a different experience getting older. But I mean, I can't tell you, there've been like a handful of people that have said really meaningful things about like the website, getting them out of a dark place, or telling me that like when their dad passed away, the Card Chronicle was like the last thing that they read, and how they shared the stories together and stuff like that. Man, it's like that means a ton, and it kind of makes all the years and the moments where you're like, am I really, shouldn't I be doing something more worthwhile? Like it does put into perspective a lot of things and does make you feel like you've done in your own little way, like something worthwhile beyond just having fun and talking about sports.
Yeah. And I think you've done it the same thing for people like me, people like everybody at State of Louisville, an inspiration for someone who wants to just get into media in this new age and taking matters into your own hands. And I feel like that's something you've done, and kind of just in your own words, which I think is incredible. So I appreciate that just as someone that's been listening to you since I was like 16. So appreciate that, and appreciate you once again for being on the show. With this show, I always like to ask people, because people leave Louisville a lot. A lot of people come back. It feels like that's just something, a yo-yo effect every time with people from Louisville. What do you think is the driving force behind that, and kind of what sets the city of Louisville apart from everywhere else?
We're in such a unique spot where like you can't name a city above us that you could reasonably call a southern city. You can't name a city below us that you would reasonably call a northern city. We're in this just great sort of area of nothingness where it seems like we do exist on our own. I mean, State of Louisville is a great name to describe that. I like to think that we sort of take the best of both worlds. Like we take a little bit of the maybe like more forward thinking, more like willing to adapt with the times from the North, but also we maintain kind of the old school charm, the manners of the South. I just think that it's such a unique spot, and the people all have the same, we all have the same shared experiences. A lot of us do. I mean, it's why you have everybody asking where you went to high school. Um, I love the idea of us being sort of like the biggest little city or the smallest big city. I like I've got no desire, and I know a lot of people do, and I'm not casting aspersions on anybody who feels like this, but I never had any real desire to like go live in New York or go live in Chicago. I hate traffic. I hate the hustle and bustle, but I also didn't want to live anywhere like super small, super quaint. I want to be able to have big things at my disposal, but I also want to be able to have real tried and true relationships with people that I can kind of grow old with, not just my wife, but like my friends. I mean, most of my best friends now are still people that I've known at a relatively young age that I met growing up through sports or growing up through high school. And, I've made adult friends as well. But one of the cool things about Louisville is I do think that like we're bonded in a different way, regardless of where you went, where you did go to high school. I mean, like my friends who went to Male, like their best friends, a lot of them are still like the Male guys. Same with Ballard, same with Eastern, same with everybody. And it's just, I think that that's a unique thing about Louisville that sort of sets us apart. And I've never, I've lived other places for at various points in time. I never really had a desire to call any other place home. I always kind of knew that this was where I was going to raise my kids and grow old. And I couldn't be more thrilled that it's worked out the way that it has for me.
And so I have one more question, and then I'm going to get into just like a quick rapid fire, and then I'll get you out of here. Once again, thank you for coming on so much. You've really done it all over the years. Whether it's performing day in and day on the radio, being a professional writer, being in the podcast world, even in your personal life with parenthood. Some would say you've mastered all the P's, which leads me to my next question. What was your experience working with Master P like? And I know that was a very quick, is that something, maybe not specifically with Master P, something on screen like that you would be interested in dabbling in again?
I mean, people talk about like imposter syndrome, where I feel remarkably fortunate, and there are moments where I'm like, how did I get so lucky? I can't believe that I get to do this. The Master P thing is the one where I'm like, if I've had a few too many drinks or something, I'm like, did that really even happen? Like, is this all just a fever dream? That like, am I living in some alternate reality where this didn't actually exist? I mean, so this is the story. It's so straightforward, and I kind of knew exactly how it was going to play out. So, Master P wakes up one day, and he's watching the screaming at each other's shows on ESPN. And he, like all of us at some point, is like, I could do a better show than that. Now, the difference is he's Master P, where, Andrew Crum and Mike Rutherford, we can't exactly just wake up and be like, I want to go start a TV show. But he starts contacting his agent. He's like, I want to do an ESPN TV show. And they're like, well, P, you've got a lot of money. We can't really make that work. And so he's got contacts in Louisville. He has a lot of family that lives here. He'd done various events here. And he had contacts with the TV station that's owned by the same parent company that owns my radio station. And so he hit them up and was like, I want to do a sports TV show. And they were like, cool, we can make that happen. And my boss talked to me and was like, hey, would you be interested in maybe hosting a sports TV show with Master P? And I was like, well, I'm going to need a few more details than just that. We're going to have to work out some stuff. But whenever anybody asks me anything, I always say like, interested. Like I'll very willing to talk about it, even if it sounds like the worst opportunity ever. So I was like, cool, like we'll talk about it at some point. Like 2 weeks later, that somehow morphed into like, oh, you're doing a show with Master P. And I think it's going to happen pretty soon. He's coming in town to talk about it on Wednesday. So we had this meeting, and I think they could tell that I was very like, I don't want to get into something that's like going to look stupid. I also like, I would like to be paid to do this. Like how's this going to work? So Master P and his agent come in town the next day. We have this big meeting, and he's like, his son Hersey is playing for the team at the time, the basketball team, and he's like, I'm going to be in town Saturday for Hersey's game. Let's do it Friday night. And this is like on Tuesday, and I was like, I'm not going to tell Master P no, like that I'm not going to do a sports radio. So he gets in town. We do a press conference at the Galt House that the news come to all the time. Like I've got no idea what the future plan for this is. Like they just keep telling me like this is like a pilot episode. We're going to get some B-roll footage that we can use for promos. We'll use it for investors. And the entire time I'm like, I'm not sure that this is going to go anywhere, but like he's got merch prepared when he comes back. My face is next to his face. I've still got that t-shirt. So we do the press conference. We do the show. I mean, I think it goes okay. I mean, it was just, they made this big deal about it. And then kind of as I expected, I just never heard anything after that again. Like he was just like, got it out of my system. I did a sports television show, and I guess we autographed Jim Beam bottles for the station and all this stuff. All the time I'm thinking like, this may be the last time that I ever do a show with Master P. And if it's not, they better start paying me something here. So it was one of the weirdest but most awesome things that I've ever done in my life. I mean, I grew up listening to Master P. He was like the biggest thing in the world when I was in 8th grade. And to be able to say that I've done a sports radio show or sports television show with Master P is something that I'll be able to take to my grave. And I'm very proud of that.
Gosh, all right. But I've always wanted to know the story of just how it, and I think you've talked about it a little bit on podcasts, but just how straightforward that was. It's crazy. God, that was a ridiculous masterpiece segue. I apologize. Anyway, we've got last segment of the show. It's going to be called we're workshopping the name. We'll see. We'll call it Crum's Corner for now. Just a couple rapid fire questions that we'll go through. Then we'll get you out of here. Once again, thank you so much for being on the show. First questions. You've had a lot of big U of L guests and other guests on your radio show, but with the CC pod, if you and Dan were able to have guests, who would be a dream guest to have on the CC podcast with you and Dan Sennard?
Phil Castellini, the Reds owner, so we could just rake him over the coals and tell him how much we hate him. That would be my dream guest. But in all seriousness, I'm trying to think of somebody that we both would like to have on that would be kind of the listeners would also like to hear us talk about. I mean, Pat Kelsey, why not? So Pat Kelsey, he has said, I don't know if he's lying or not, but he told a mutual of ours that he does listen to the podcast and that he was at an event where Danny's dad was, and he was disappointed that Danny wasn't there. But Pat Kelsey, huge Reds guy, just like ourselves. I think anytime you can have a conversation with the head basketball coach, it's very, very cool. He's also pretty open. I think we could get him pretty loose and let him say some stuff. So I'll say Pat Kelsey right now.
So another question, what was the most absurd movie recommendation you received from Trevor Kelsey?
I mean, I could pull up the list right now. He still sends it to me like once every few months where it's just like, it's on the list now. I always ignored him. Like I knew I wasn't going to, the fact that he made me watch Shallow Hal because I lost a bet, it furthered my belief that all of those movies that he wanted me to watch were just absolute trash. I watched Suicide Kings for like 5 minutes because he made me do it because he said we're going to lose a game if we didn't. I don't even remember what else was on that list. So I'll say Shallow Hal. Terrible movie. Awful film.
Ridiculous movie. Is it who played George Costanza? His hairline in that movie is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Favorite underrated restaurant in Louisville?
I used to always say Thai Cafe. Shout out to my guy, the Snow family. Shout out to my guy Vishan Snow. His dad used to run it. They sold it. It's now Bon Mi Thai. It's in that Westport Road Plaza. The food is still very, very good. That's fantastic. Also, District 6 is very, very good. They've got great Vietnamese food. I'm a big fan. I'll throw those two out there.
Question before the question. Do you know about Nathan Fielder's The Rehearsal?
I do. I've still never watched it. I keep seeing all the Miracle at over the Mojave clips, and I laugh every single time, even not knowing the full story. I'm going to have to watch it at some point, yes.
Dang. All right. So I had a question. I don't know if you don't know the concept of the show. I guess we could skip that one.
I understand the concept. I've just never actually seen it.
So there's, how he builds kind of these elaborate sets, and you're kind of simulating real life situations. There's been some tweets. One was about Sixers fans saying, what if Nathan Fielder's next season was about Ben Simmons? And they build sets, they hire 20,000 people to fill an arena to simulate a game, get Ben Simmons back on track. If you were given a blank check from HBO and you could do that with any player or coach to focus on and like build back up their career by a rehearsal style situation, who would you pick? It could be U of L, it could be Reds, it could be anybody.
Derek Character. Derek Character needs the Nathan Fielder treatment. I think we could get him going again. He was a world champion. He took Greg Oden to task back when he was 16 years old. We all knew that. I think Derek was he was not a bad kid when he was here. He was just super immature. And some of the stories about him when he was here were very, they were just like kid stuff. I think that Derek could have used a second chance. Now, I think he's like 36 years old now, so it may be a little bit late. But I would love to give Derek Character the Nathan Fielder experience.
Absolutely. And then final question I'll ask, and maybe I can take national championship out of maybe Sans national championship. What do you think is your, I don't know if the word jubilant is the word, but kind of the most, I'll say the word jubilant moment as a Louisville sports fan, maybe outside of championships that you can think of?
I mean, honestly, the Final Four of Wichita State was right. Maybe that's a cheating answer, but I do think that one gets overlooked because, I mean, if we're all being honest about it now, and we can, it's been 12 years. All of us were going down to Atlanta with the belief that we were going to watch Louisville win the national championship. Like we were the favorites. We felt great about that team. And at the very least, we assumed we were going to be there on Monday playing Syracuse or Michigan. And when Clay Anthony early hits that step back three to go up 12 early, not even early, it was a few minutes into the second half. That was the first moment where I was like, oh my God, like we're going to have to go home tomorrow. This is like my just whole being dropped. And then, Luke doing what he did, the big shots down the stretch, Peyton Siva making some gigantic plays. Like the feeling after that game, it was a totally different high than the feeling after the national title game. National title game was like, oh my God, we did it. I never thought this would actually come. The Wichita State game was like, it was euphoria because you won, but it also was this massive load of relief that you got to stay around and you got to keep riding this wave for at least a couple more days. So that, like, I always say, like, that's my second favorite Louisville game behind the national title game, just because of it was the feeling was different, but it was almost just as overall good because of we faced death like directly in the face and kept going on. And then, I would say like all the 2012 games during that run from the Big East tournament through that changed. You forget how mad everybody was at Rick Pitino at that point. People wanted him out. They saw what Calipari was doing at Kentucky. It had been over a decade since he got the job. They thought that we'd have a national title by then. They thought the 2009 team, fell flat of where they should have been. And then we'd had a couple lean years between. And then that 2012 team had underachieved up until the postseason. So all of those wins, it really felt turned the tide of Louisville basketball and set the stage for what happened in 2013. So those were two very, very fun years to be following and talking about Louisville basketball.
Yeah. And I think my favorite moment is that for some reason, that Elite Eight comeback against Florida, I always feel like that's the one that I gravitate towards as a Louisville fan. So, Mike, once again, I want to thank you so much for joining the show. I really appreciate you kind of diving in to your background, how you got into sports media, just what Louisville sports mean to you, what the city means to you, and, everything in between. So thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it a ton.
Of course, man. And I really appreciate you saying the kind words. All that stuff really, really means a lot, and had fun.
Appreciate that. And all right, guys, thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's 502 somewhere.